Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, actually love Rhaenyra? Well, it might seem a bit of a strange question at first. To many fans, the answer is of course, yes he did. But I'm not so sure it's as clean cut as that. Fire and Blood, by its very nature, often presents a lot of conflicting information, leaving it up to the reader to work out and believe what they think really happened. The nature of Daemon's relationship with Rhaenyra is one of these areas that this is used most effectively by George R.R. Martin. Fire and Blood presents us with a situation wherein Daemon loved his niece and found himself unable to marry her due to the intervention of others. Or Daemon is a political schemer preying on a young and impressionable girl to grow his own power and get as close to the throne as possible. There is certainly evidence that points to either of these, and in some cases maybe a bit of both. House of the Dragon has definitely muddied how people look at the relationship, given how it does lean more towards real love, with some sanitization of the more creepy and darker parts of their relationship. The show does make a token effort to add some ambiguity, but it's clear after the time skip in season 1 where the writers' minds are at. So, you get a lot of people imprinting Daemon and Rhaenyra from the show into Fire and Blood, when they are separate entities altogether. In this video, we're going to be breaking down both sides of this argument, trying to weigh up which series of events are most likely to be true, and also talk about some of the choices House of the Dragon made when adapting Fire and Blood from page to screen. Make no mistake. Should Rhaenyra ever sit the Iron Throne, it will be Lord Fleabottom who rules us, a king consort as cruel and unforgiving as Maegor ever was. My own head will be the first cut off, I do not doubt, but your queen, my daughter, will soon follow Otto Hightower to the small council of Viserys I. Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons, the blacks and the greens. I think there are two reasons why fans often question the dynamic of the relationship between Daemon and Rhaenyra, and well, his motivations. Firstly, we have to look at what we know about Daemon's character itself. Maester Yandel describes Daemon as dashing, daring, dangerous, but mercurial and quick to take offence. Archmaester Gyldayn wrote that Daemon was ambitious, impetuous and moody, as charming as he was hot-tempered. All this is reflected in his actions in his youth. Prior to the Great Council of 101 AC, he went as far to gather an army of men-at-arms and sellswords, ready to go to war with Corlys Velaryon to protect Viserys' claim to the throne. If we then look forward to the Stepstones War of 106 AC, we have Daemon effectively fighting a private war to spite his brother, going as far to crown himself a king. Both these events highlight why he's called the Rogue Prince, and backs up the claims of Yandel and Gyldayn about his character, especially his ambition. But on the other side of the coin, our main source of information about Daemon comes via these sources in Fire and Blood and the Rogue Prince, both of which are historical accounts written centuries after the fact, using sources from the dance like Mushroom and Orwell. It's not like we have any point of view prose of Daemon to really make our own judgment about his character. I love Fire and Blood for what it is, and I enjoy the fact it does present conflicting accounts, allowing the reader to decide. There are definitely two sides to Daemon's relationship with Rhaenyra. You have the part of it where it seems like he's trying to use her to falter his fall down the line in succession. Until the birth of Rhaenyra, he was his brother's undisputed heir. Some of his actions reek of a man looking for the best way to maintain his position. On the other hand, there does seem to be accounts that suggest, at the very least, from Rhaenyra's point of view, there was some kind of infatuation or love there. The first indication we have of a relationship between Daemon and Rhaenyra comes seemingly prior to King Viserys' rise as king. Fire and Blood states that from a young age, Rhaenyra was enamoured with Daemon, who would often bring her back lavish gifts from his adventures across the Narrow Sea in Essos. Age is an important factor here. If we use the Great Council of 101 AC as a marker, Daemon was born in 81 AC, making him 20 years of age. At the same time, Rhaenyra was born in 97, making her 4 years of age in 100 101 AC. Given the text suggests Daemon began giving her these gifts prior to Viserys becoming king in 103 AC, means that either these were just harmless gifts between an uncle and his young niece, or there's something much more sinister going on from Daemon's part, given the language used to describe Rhaenyra's view as being enamored. I think what's important to consider here is at this point in time, with the birth of Rhaenyra, Daemon still viewed himself as Viserys' heir and very much acted that way, pushing his brother multiple times to give him the title of Prince of Dragonstone, which Viserys refused, yet at the same time would not name Rhaenyra his heir. The succession was in limbo because Viserys assumed Aemma Arryn would give him a son. So it's really hard to tell what Daemon's motives with Rhaenyra are at this point in time. Were these gifts harmless or part of a more sinister plan? It's not until the Heir for a Day incident after the death of Prince Balon and Aemma Arryn in 105 AC and the official naming of Rhaenyra as heir, Daemon's motivations become clearer to interpret. The first Viserys intended his daughter Rhaenyra to follow him. Do you deny it? But as the king lay dying, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard decided that it should be otherwise. Arianne Martell to Aris Oakheart, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 13, The Soiled Knight. When Daemon returns to court in 111 AC and eventually gives up his title of King of the Narrow Sea, Fire and Blood makes it clear that Rhaenyra was most excited by the return of her favourite uncle and begged him to stay. For clarity, at this point in time, Daemon would have been around 30 years of age and Rhaenyra 14. Aegon had already been born, but she was still Viserys' named heir despite conversations about Aegon being made heir happening. It also seems it was clear from the get-go Daemon was cold towards Viserys' sons by Alicent Hightower, given they had pushed him further down the line of succession. Realistically for Daemon at this stage, if he did intend to maintain his own position, the as of yet unmarried Rhaenyra may have been his best option. Rhaenyra was a different matter. Multiple sources in Fire and Blood state that Daemon spent long hours in her company, enthralling her with tales of his journeys and battles in the Stepstones, much like he did when she was a child before he left court. He gave her pearls, silks, and books and jewels, read poems to her, dined with her, hawked with her, sailed with her, entertained her by making mock of the greens at court, the lickspittles fawning over Queen Alicent and her son. He was also said to have frequently praised her beauty, declaring her to be the fairest maid in all of the Seven Kingdoms. Most of all, it's claimed in Fire and Blood that they began to fly together on their dragons almost daily, racing Syrax and Caraxes to Dragonstone and back. It really makes it seem like they were spending every minute of the day together. From the outside perspective, once Daemon returned to court, he picked up where he left off in regard to building this connection with Rhaenyra. Again, given the nature of Fire and Blood, it's really hard to know Daemon's true motivations without his point of view, but it very much reads like he was courting her. You could argue from a modern day point of view of the story that it almost comes across as grooming, especially considering that Daemon is 30 and Rhaenyra 14 at this point in time. While the age gap is horrific by modern standards, it's not uncommon in a pseudo-medieval setting such as Westeros. So while we as the reader have a distaste for it, it doesn't mean it's something that isn't accepted within the world building of the story. But yeah, Daemon's behaviour here is very questionable. The first time we get any indication in the text that the relationship between them was more than just platonic comes 6 months after Daemon's return, just prior to him returning to the Stepstones. Grand Maester Gyldayn states in his account, Viserys and Daemon quarrelled again, and Prince Daemon departed. Of the cause of the quarrel, he does not elaborate. Others assert that it was Queen Alicent's urging that Viserys sent Daemon away. Septon Eustace and Mushroom's accounts tell a very different story, each different from the other. Eustace writes that Daemon seduced Rhaenyra and claimed her maidenhood, which I would argue tracks with his behaviour the prior 6 months. They were discovered abed together by Sir Aric Cargill of the Kingsguard and brought before the king. Rhaenyra insisted she was in love with Daemon and pleaded with her father for leave to marry him. Viserys would not hear of it, however, and reminded his daughter that Prince Daemon already had a wife. If this was Daemon's plan all along, then it was half the outcome he was hoping for. Yes, Rhaenyra wanted to marry him, but Viserys refused given he was already married. Mushroom's account paints the relationship in a far more sinister light in terms of Daemon's motivations. At least with Eustace's account you can make an argument that Rhaenyra loved Daemon. With Mushrooms, it's less clean-cut. The Fool states it was Sir Criston Cole that the princess yearned for, not the rogue prince. But Sir Criston was a true knight, noble and chaste, and mindful of his Kingsguard vow, and though he was in her company day and night, he had never so much as kissed her, nor made any declaration of love towards her. Now, Mushroom says that Daemon said the following. How he knew he said this is another matter altogether. When he looks at you, he sees the little girl you were, not the woman you've become. But I can teach you how to make him see you as a woman. Mushroom states that Daemon began giving her kissing lessons. From there, he went on to show his niece how to pleasure a man, an exercise the Fool claims sometimes involved himself. Mushroom also claims that Daemon taught her to disrobe enticingly and flew with her on dragonback to lonely rocks in Blackwater Bay, where they could disport naked all day unobserved, and the princess could practice the art of pleasuring men. At night, he would smuggle her from her rooms dressed as a page boy, and take her secretly to brothels on the streets of Silk, where the princess could observe men and women in the act of lovemaking, and learn more of these womanly arts from the harlots of King's Landing. Unlike Septon Eustace, Mushroom is firm that Princess Rhaenyra remained a maiden, as she wished to preserve her innocence as a gift for her beloved. But when at least she approached Sir Criston Cole, using all she had learned, Cole was horrified and spurned her, or at least that's one version of the tale. The whole tale would soon come out in no small part thanks to the Fool himself. King Viserys at first refused to believe a word of it until Daemon confirmed it was true. "Give the girl to me, to wife," he purportedly told Viserys. Who else would take her now? Instead, King Viserys sent him to exile, never to return to Westeros on the pain of death. Now, while Eustace and Mushroom's accounts have one major difference, in one, Daemon does bed Rhaenyra, and the other he does not go that far. There's room enough that elements of both of these accounts can be true at the same time. The issue with Mushroom as a source is while there is often a grain of truth in his accounts, he does tend to exaggerate the details greatly. Regardless of what version of events happened, the end result is the same. All becomes uncovered, and Daemon pushes Viserys to marry Rhaenyra to him. As to quote, "Who would want her now?" suggests this may have been his end goal with a relationship with Rhaenyra all along. Rhaenyra's reputation being sullied, forcing Viserys to marry her to Daemon, who by marrying the heir would one day be prince consort, with one hand on the throne. So while it's possible that Daemon loved Rhaenyra all the while this was happening, the way in which his actions are framed in fire and blood does make it seem like his relationship with Rhaenyra up to this point was all with the end goal in mind. As we know, Daemon would go on to marry Rhaenyra Velaryon, daughter of Lord Corlys Velaryon. Politically, it was a good match for Daemon, given the rising power of House Velaryon. By most accounts, Daemon's marriage to Rhaenyra was a happy one, spent travelling the world, with Rhaenyra giving Daemon twin daughters, Baela and Rhaena. Rhaenyra would go on to marry Rhaenyra Velaryon, Rhaenyra's brother, whom she would appear to give 3 sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys and Joffrey. But given the rumours of Rhaenyra's sexuality and Rhaenyra's relationship with Harwin Strong, whom many believed were the true father of her children, the marriage was certainly a political move. Once Daemon and Rhaenyra settled back on Driftmark, Rhaenyra became close friends with Rhaenyra, though Rhaenyra would later die in childbirth in 127 AC, with Rhaenyra also being murdered by his rumoured lover Sir Khal Corey. Mushroom account states that Daemon in fact paid Khal to murder Rhaenyra to allow him to marry Rhaenyra. Whilst Mushroom is the only source of these claims, it does seem to fit Daemon's long-term motivation dating back to Rhaenyra's teenage years, to marry her and thus grow his own power. Less than 6 months after the deaths of Rhaenyra and Rhaena and Harwin, Rhaenyra secretly married Daemon on Dragonstone, which I guess gives some credence to Mushroom's tale that Daemon may have been involved in Rhaenyra's death, and potentially even Harwin Strong. Septon Eustace claims that the two had wed in secret to prevent Viserys from prohibiting the marriage, while Mushroom suggests that Daemon, aged 39, had already impregnated Rhaenyra, who was 23. The news of their wedding caused a great scandal at court, and Rhaenyra's father was livid. Viserys angrily declared that the wedding so soon after the deaths of Daemon's wife and Rhaenyra's husband was an insult to their memory in House Velaryon, and it took some time before Viserys and Daemon reconciled. So if we buy this idea that Daemon's motivation was power and not love, he seems to have achieved his goal, especially once Aegon the Younger is conceived. My main issue with the scheming Daemon theory is for a man seeking power, is he really going to be content to allow Rhaenyra's sons, via Laenor or Harwin, to sit the Iron Throne over Aegon the Younger or Prince Viserys, his own sons? It really depends. The main counterpoint is Baela, his daughter, was betrothed to Jace, so his bloodline would be on the throne regardless, even if it is via Baela and not Aegon or Viserys. That might simply have been enough for him. But there are a lot of fan theories beyond the scope of this video that, if the Dance of the Dragons had not happened, Daemon may have eventually sought to install Aegon as heir over Jace. But this is a very tinfoil theory and one for another day. The whore on Dragonstone is not a threat, no more than Rowan and these traitors in the Reach. The danger is my uncle. Once Daemon is dead, all these fools flying our sister's banner will run back to their castles and trouble us no more. Aemon Targaryen to Criston Cole. Fire and blood, the dying of the dragons, the red dragon and the gold. So, that's how things stand at the start of the Dance of the Dragons. I think it's very hard to make a call either way. I think there's enough circumstantial evidence to suggest Daemon was scheming and plotting a marriage with Rhaenyra to ensure his power and role. Whether the accounts of Eustace and Mushroom are true is another matter altogether. I suspect some version or combination of them might have happened. But did Daemon love Rhaenyra? Probably. It's hard to imagine the man would spend the best part of 20 years trying to marry her, spending so much one-on-one time with her, and even more if Mushroom and Eustace are to be believed. That was some kind of affection or feeling. But just like Daemon's scheming, all we can do is speculate. Given the nature of Fire and Blood, we can never really know what Daemon felt without it being stated by a second-hand source that he said he did, which is what we have with Rhaenyra. Multiple accounts of her being enamoured or infatuated with Daemon. I do find it interesting that we do have accounts of Rhaenyra's feelings, but not Daemon's. You can read into that as much as you want. But at least prior to the Dance of the Dragons, I think it's very likely a mix of all of these scenarios to some degree. Just we can never know the exact makeup of the mix. Like with most Mushroom's accounts, there is a grain of truth in there somewhere. Now, the relationship between Daemon and Rhaenyra seems to be quite straightforward once Viserys accepts the marriage and they reconcile. Daemon is of course going to back Rhaenyra and support her during the Dance of the Dragons, given his own personal investment with his connection to her, but also his pure hatred for anything Otto Hightower. He, alongside Corlys, are the two biggest leadership figures in the Black faction. Their relationship starts to decline as Rhaenyra's mental health does, as she becomes more paranoid as the war goes on, thanks to personal loss after personal loss, and several high-profile betrayals, most notably by the Dragonseeds. And this is where Nettles comes into play, because her role in Daemon's story, depending on the nature of her relationship with him, certainly muddies the water. Nettles and Sheepstealer would join Daemon in hunting Aemon One-Eye and Vhagar in the Trident, as Daemon felt at least 2 dragons were necessary to confront Vhagar. The pair stayed at House Mooten's castle in Maidenpool, where they continued to search every morning. According to Mushroom, Daemon had come to love Nettles and took her as his bedmate, despite the fact she was an unlikely paramour for a prince. Though Mushroom's veracity is often questionable, Gyldayn considers the story to be far more likely than most of Mushroom's tales. Gyldayn further references Maester Norrin's Chronicle of Maidenpool, where it's recorded the prince and his bastard girl slept in adjoining bedrooms, but they ate together each night and each morning. Norrin wrote that Daemon doted upon Nettles, as a man might dote upon a daughter, and describes Daemon teaching Nettles common courtesies, and giving her fine gifts such as ivory hairbrushes and silver looking glasses, velvet and satin cloaks, and leather riding boots. Norrin further writes that Daemon showed Nettles how to wash herself properly. Maidservants reported they often shared a single tub, washing each other. So when you take these accounts, there are 3 options. She was Daemon's lover, she was his bastard daughter, or their relationship was close but platonic. Mysaria, one of Daemon's former paramours and Rhaenyra's Master of Whispers, fed Rhaenyra's growing distrust of the Dragonseeds, with rumours of Nettles and Daemon's relationship. Rhaenyra is said to have raged, declaring that Nettles had used spells to bind Sheepstealer to her and seduce her husband, that Daemon could not be relied upon while he was in the girl's thrall. Now, while it would seem that Mysaria believed these tales, it doesn't really matter if they were true or not. She used them to manipulate Rhaenyra. When word reached Maidenpool about Rhaenyra's order to take Nettles Nettles' head, Daemon, when informed, helped her escape before flying to Harrenhal. Now, it's really hard to narrow down Daemon's motivations for allowing Nettles to flee, and it would make sense if he loved her or she was actually his bastard daughter. But the only lesson to take away is at the very least Rhaenyra believed in her paranoia and jealousy that he was enthralled by her. It does seem though that if Daemon did help her flee, he'd become aware of Rhaenyra's frail mental state, which some suggest is why he chose to try and end the war quickly by facing off with Aemond at the God's Eye. His plan was to take Aemond out, and he fully intended to sacrifice himself to allow a chance that Rhaenyra, or at the very least his bloodline, could rule. Others argue that his motivation at the God's Eye was nothing to do with trying to save Rhaenyra, but everything to do with his own personal vendetta with Aemond. Again, the very nature of Fire and Blood means we can only speculate. Did Daemon love Rhaenyra? It depends on a few factors. I think each person who reads Fire and Blood will have their own answer. There is a lot to point to yes. There is a lot that points to her merely being a political tool for him. There is a lot that paints this whole relationship with her, such as her young age, in a very sinister light. So it really depends on what you believe the true telling in Fire and Blood is. I think, for what it's worth, that it's a combination of these accounts to some extent, with elements of all three. There's a grain of truth there somewhere. But here's the thing, it's still possible for her to be a political tool, their relationship to have this sinister element, and there still be love involved. This seems to have also been the take House the Dragon took when trying to create its telling of Fire and Blood. It really focused on their love and chemistry, but also, early in Season 1, how she was a political tool for Daemon. It also seems that House the Dragon's telling, despite some rocky patches in their relationship, they do still love each other as the story progresses, which is partly why I think Nettles was cut from the show. So what do you think about this? What sources in Fire and Blood do you think are correct? Did Daemon love Rhaenyra or was she just a political tool for him? Let me know in the comments.